Today I'm going to talk you through the abstract of a study conducted by myself, Julia Gunn and Koromoto Power-Febres in our capacity within the Taylor and Francis Publishing Ethics and Integrity team. Our work considered whether authorship changes can act as an indicator of research integrity concerns in submissions received by Taylor and Francis journals.
Oh no.
So
just to get formalities out of the way, as a competing interest, all of the authors of the abstract were, or at the time of the study, full-time employees of Taylor and Francis and have served on various publishing and industry committees.
So what was the context for us to start thinking about this as a study? Authorship for sale, i.e. where someone sells the authorship of their manuscript or someone buys an authorship slot on a manuscript, has been on the radar for publishers for a number of years now. Dr. Anna Abelkina's research has discussed authorship changes as an indicator of paper mills, and Twitter accounts such as the Authorship for Sale Twitter account run by Nick Wise have monitored the social media channels such as Telegram, where these adverts are posted and the fees advertised. Anecdotally, in the Taylor and Francis experience, these requests will typically be made following the first round of revisions of a submission, when the authors know that that submission no longer risks being rejected at first pass by the editor and has a legitimate chance at being accepted. We were very aware of this as an issue across journals.
Team just needs 1 minute to recorrect. I apologize. So in the interim, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself.
Maybe. So I am head of research integrity at Taylor and Francis. I've worked at Taylor and Francis for 3 years, and I've worked in publishing for too long, almost 16 years. So I head up the team who are responsible for investigating where concerns are raised around content we've published or identifying issues with content that's been submitted.
It's okay, and it's signaling, so please go ahead.
Thank you. There was I. So I was babbling on about this. And basically what we had noted was that we were seeing a lot of authorship for sale kind of retractions, where this was cited as the reason for the retraction, but we were noting that this wasn't the only issue with that paper. So why do the study? So systematic manipulation indicators have been high on the agenda for publishers and for researchers in this space for a while. We know there's been a boom in the development of research integrity tools that say that they can spot these indicators of manipulation by paper mills or bad faith actors. Despite this context, to our knowledge, there is limited research into how accurate any of these indicators are about indicators of further concern. So at this time of the study, we were not aware of any empirical studies that had tried to assess the association between authorship changes and any other concerns. So we wanted to try and understand about this as the value as an indicator. And in our own investigations into concerning editorial handling or problematic special issues, as Tim alluded to in his slides, we were aware of increasing attempts to manipulate the peer review process and author lists. For TNF purposes, we were aware that for a lot of our academic editors, they were not aware of this as an issue. They were looking for the best in their researchers and authors, and they really couldn't believe the lengths that some people would go to subvert the process. We really wanted to build an evidence base to show that this is happening and it's not just anecdotal evidence. So how did we conduct our cross-sectional study? So since March 2023, any request to change 3 or more authors on a submission across 1,321 Taylor and Francis journals has been investigated by the Publishing Ethics and Integrity team. We consider an authorship change adding authors, removing authors, or adding and reviewing authors at the same time. We set the threshold at 3 changes based on anecdotal evidence that this was the threshold where we'd started to see it most associated with concerning authorship behavior. And we ran this study between January 24 and December 24. In this time, we received requests for 496 articles to have the authorship changed on them post-submission. and 44 of these were latterly excluded because we hadn't completed the assessments by the time of the analysis. Following an authorship change request being made, we would assess the form, the associated article, and the peer review audit trail. With our assessments, we solely focused on adherence to editorial policies, so had they got all their ethics declarations in, things like that, and were there any features of systematic manipulation, so tortured phrases, peer review manipulation. We then did odds ratio analysis to establish how likely a submission where the authorship change was rejected were to have concerns when compared with a submission where we were recommending the authorship change was accepted. We didn't, at the time of this study, test correlation to see if there was correlation between authorship changes and the concerns identified. We didn't look at what academic editors might have additionally identified as issues, and requests below that threshold of 3 or more were assessed by the academic editors alone, and we don't have the data on that. We haven't yet analysed the data on a more granular level to see if it's more prevalent in particular disciplines, in particular journals, or across particular article types. So what did we find? So of the sample we reviewed, we found that 81% of authorship change requests requesting to make 3 or more changes were denied, with only 19% of them being approved. This is, of course, with the caveat that the sample we assessed is very small compared to the overall submissions received by Taylor and Francis journals. And we would also expect the sample to be relatively small because as the need to make 3 or more changes should be relatively rare. When a request was denied by the ethics team, we found it was 32 times more likely to have concerns, so a failure to adhere to our editorial policies or in a feature of systematic manipulation, than an article where the authorship change was recommended to be approved. This data suggests there may be an association between concerning authorship changes being identified and declined and the article itself featuring concerns. On this graph, you can see our total sample and the ultimate manuscript outcome. Hopefully, you can see that the vast majority where a concern was identified, the paper was rejected or withdrawn. I would note that some of them were ultimately accepted, and that might be for a number of reasons. So where it was a failure to adhere with our editorial policies, it may have been something that authors could fix. So they might have been able to add that ethics declaration that was missing. But it also might be that when the authors submit their authorship change request, they receive a lot of information about our authorship policy and our criteria, and they may have realized they didn't wish to make that change, that author didn't actually meet the criteria as it was. With all of these, this is something we'd like to further explore and refine our methodology. And it's worth noting that with any recommendation we made about the authorship change, the academic editor has that final decision on the outcome of the paper as the journal editor in respect of their editorial independence. Finally, so what do we plan to do next? We want to further develop our study. We want to explore whether implementing this threshold by itself has had an unintended consequence. So have bad faith actors worked out that we only within TNF look at them when 3 or more changes have been made? Are they managing to evade that kind of scrutiny? So we'd like to experiment with other thresholds. We'd like to further analyze whether there are any disciplinary differences. Do particular article types receive more of these requests? So things like, is a research article more likely to receive these in a literature review? And what percentage of the author lists are being changed? So are these papers where it has 30 authors on the list and they're adding or removing 3? Or is it a sole authored manuscript where they're adding 3 authors? In assignments, we'd also like to capture a bit more about, is it a failure to adhere to those editorial policies, or were these all papers with tortured phrases? And finally, we'd really like to broaden our sample on this. So we'd like to work with other publishers and other journals to see if they have data that is similar to ours, or is this TNF data pattern? And that's it. Thank you for having me, and thank you to our reviewers as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much for this presentation. Weird things are happening in this world. Let me go to that microphone first. Please go ahead.
Yeah, hi, Gunther Eisenbach, Champion Publications. As far as I know, COPE is the COPE guideline is that you have to ask authors for the reason for this authorship change. What were the reasons authors brought forward to change 3 authors? I'm actually quite shocked that this actually exists and that also Taylor and Francis is allowing that. So what are the reasons that you find acceptable?
Yes, we see a lot of reasons. So on the most obvious ones where I think they're trying to manipulate the process, it will be, I forgot to add them. I didn't realize their name wasn't on the system. But we do see a lot of, in the process of revisions, where an editor or a reviewer has requested additional experiments, they might go away and they need additional expertise. And that might involve 3 or 4 authors. We do ask them to provide a full explanation. And some of them are a lot more obvious. And it is something that, again, we'd like to really gather that comprehensive data to see if we can work out a pattern. And particularly, as I'm sure some of the publishers in the room will know, you do see templates where it's the same, they're just adding the same wording over and over again. Thank you.
Sure. Question from this microphone, John.
John Yanidi, Stanford. Very nice presentation. In my experience in the past as editor-in-chief of JCI, whenever I was seeing a request for change for author, maybe it was just very biased, but immediately I was try to find a way to reject the paper. You know, like it was like a signal, wow, these people don't even know who the authors are of what they submitted. So in your assessment of concerns versus, you know, accepted, declined, and authorship change, and then accepted the manuscript, how independent were these? I mean, you know, which comes first and which follows? Because, you know, obviously one could lead to the other in some fashion. And the other comment is that why just focus on the 3+, which is a very small number of, you know, very rare, probably very egregious most of the time, and not the far more common? I'm wondering if you have like a number of just single author being added or dropped, which probably would be, I don't know, 100 times more than the 3+.
I think, so we chose that 3 threshold on that kind of anecdotal experience where that was where we were starting to see the most egregious kind of authorship change requests. And I think it is something that we would like to experiment with. In my experience, in terms of what has reached the ethics team, our requests where they're adding 1 author have typically been less clear-cut, and it's something where we've obviously deferred to the editors as a subject expertise, like, would this extent of revisions require that additional review? In looking at them, I would say that it was ethical declarations we looked at first, and then we would look at the manipulation indicators, but we did look at both of them for all of those assessments.
Okay. There are many people with questions now. The front microphone, please.
Anna Balkiner, Freie Universität Berlin. My question is about 3 author threshold.
Yes.
So just let's think, if we have a paper with 5 authors and several authors dropped and then 3 added more, this is really suspicious. But when we speak about a really large collaboration, but there are also paper mill papers with only several authors. And so this 3 author threshold doesn't pass, because if we only have 3 authors, 2 dropped, 2 added, and there is evidence of that. So this would really create a lot of false negatives in the study. And also it may speak also about paper mill model, because we know that some, for example, Iranian paper mills, they use this model of adding or new authorships, and some other paper mills, they actually sell authorship and add only probably 1 author. And so the question is, do you have and do you see some country specific patterns in 3+ authorship changes?
I think this is something, again, we'd like to get more data on. I would say that the concerning authorship changes we see have the same geographic patterns that we see with wider systematic manipulation cases, of which all of the publishers and yourself will be aware of. I do think it's something that we need to do continued education on as well, because we know that a lot of researchers, when we point this out to them, like, oh, I didn't know. Now, whether that's genuine or not, I don't know, but I think it's something we need to explore as well. And as additional context, obviously, we do have journals where we know they have been the target, much like Tim described in his slides, of people trying to manipulate the peer review process. And in those kind of journals, that is where we would consider whether that journal no longer considers authorship changes outright, in the same way it no longer considers author recommended. But I think it is that wider 360, but I absolutely take that on board, that percentage change might have been much better.
Thank you. Microphone in the back, please.
Kyung-Won Hong from the National Institute of Health. Great presentation, and I really look forward to the next stage of the analysis. My question was about, I guess, the timing of those requests submitted. Like, I guess that's just a question / comments. Like, could you comment on when those requests were submitted? Like, was it during the revision, like resubmission, or like how long since, I guess, the published date?
Yeah, so a typical request we see is that they receive the initial, so they've submitted the paper, it's gone for that initial round of review, and they have received a minor revision or a major revision, and they will submit it then, generally.
Thank you. One more question there, please.
Megan McDevitt, I'm a managing editor with KnowledgeWorks Global. So I have a process question. So who is doing the checking? Like, is it the editorial office, managing editor, or are there tools, technology they're using to help them with this? And then this seems, in my mind, I'm always like, this is so much work. Is this sustainable to keep checking at this level of detail?
Yeah, so in the current process, with that threshold of 3, it is being reviewed by our research integrity managers. We do have some tools that we might use to just do kind of presence absence checks, particularly on those kind of things around declarations. The sustainability question is a really good one, and it's something that we constantly have in the back of our mind, but for us, it is much better to prevent something being published that we have to retract later than letting it go through and getting it retracted. And it's something that I hope that we can develop further automation. Obviously, there are a number of tools out there on the landscape that maybe might serve this purpose one day, but something for us at the moment, it's worth the investment of our time versus risk. Thank you.